Welcome to HFY Sci-fi channel. Don't forget to subscribe and explore. She came in after the 5th day. The theft was small at first. Just a ration bar gone missing. Easy to mistake for forgetfulness. Maybe I ate it half awake. Maybe the inventory log was off. But when a full protein pack disappeared the next night, torn seal, empty wrapper stuffed under my cot like a rushed apology, I knew someone was slipping past my motion sensors. And not just someone desperate. Someone small. I watched the shadows after that. Slept with one eye half open, hand close to the grip of my sidearm. But nothing stirred. Not the wind that scraped the sandblasted walls. Not the rusted door hinge I deliberately left loose so it would squeal. Whatever it was, it moved like smoke and vanished even faster. By day 7, hunger was chewing at me. I'd rationed tight, mapped the perimeter, sealed the outer hatch with wire mesh. Every entry point except one, a narrow crawl pipe too tight for any grown body. I baited it, left a tin half open near the vent grill. Waited. It was past third dusk when I saw her. Thin as wiring, limbs taut like she'd never had a full meal in her life. Skin like scorched clay, eyes huge and black in the dim light. Not glowing, not shimmering, just watching. She didn't hesitate. Slid through the crawl pipe like it was routine. Her bare feet made no sound on the floor. She went straight for the food, ignored everything else. Her fingers moved fast, too fast. She didn't even check to see if anyone was awake. I could have stopped her, could have slammed the door, shouted, done something stupid to make her bolt and smash into the walls. But I didn't move. I just watched. She didn't know I was awake, that I was breathing slowly through clenched teeth, heart pounding in the kind of rhythm I'd learned to recognize during the last war. Right before something irreversible happened, she grabbed the tin, tucked it into a makeshift sling on her back, and turned to leave. But in that brief moment, she looked around. Not scanning, not checking for threats. Looking, like someone memorizing a room she might never see again. When she reached the grill, she paused. Just for a beat. Her eyes found mine in the dark. She saw me. I know she did. But she didn't freeze. Didn't speak. Just vanished back into the pipe, quiet as breath, carrying the only real meal left in this dead corner of the world. I sat up, every muscle locked, every instinct telling me to grab my weapon, to chase, to reclaim what was mine. But I stayed put. Not out of kindness. Not yet. What I felt wasn't mercy. It was curiosity. Something about the way she moved. Like hunger had shaped her bones. Like fear was an old friend she no longer had time to greet. Made me believe this wasn't just about food. It was the way she didn't run when she saw me. Not really. She vanished, yes. But not in panic. In purpose. She'd done this before. And I had the feeling she wasn't stealing for herself. She hadn't bothered to cover her tracks. The grit outside the pipe was swept in 2 places, just enough to show where her knees had landed. A slight depression where her palm had pressed for balance. Too light to set off sensors. Too careful to break a footprint. But she hadn't counted on someone watching close. I gathered my gear without sound. Left the shelter behind like a question half answered. No weapon. No beacon. Just a wrapped tin of dried pulp and a gut full of things I couldn't name yet. Her trail threaded between wind-buried walls and broken shuttle frames half swallowed by sand. Not obvious, no. But her pattern gave her away, hugging shadow, avoiding open stone, always a handhold near, as if she'd learned early that safe ground rarely is. She moved in diagonals. Not running from me, running from everything. It took 3 hours before I crossed into black-marked territory. Faded hazard symbols, old alliance tape fluttering like dried skin from a bent post. This was the zone they'd fenced off during final evacuation. Unsearched, untreated, left to rot with whatever died inside. I stepped across that line without a sound. My boots sank a little deeper. Dust here was finer, coated everything in a dull film. Wreckage had no shine. Metal twisted in angles no ship was ever designed to land in. The air changed. Not staler, quieter. Heavy in the chest like it didn't want company. Her path curved through a tangle of collapsed beams. then into what looked like the open mouth of a freight tunnel. Blackened roof. Pocked floor. 100 places to vanish. I crouched low near a dented panel. Took a breath that tasted like ash and copper. There, scratched faint into a rusted rail. For short lines, slanted right. A marking. Not human. Not recent. Carved by someone who wasn't hurrying. A signal, maybe. Or a habit. She was leaving signs. For herself? For someone else? I kept going. Twice I lost the trail and had to circle back. Once I stepped too hard and a panel groaned beneath me like a wounded thing, and I froze until the wind reclaimed the silence. Every step deeper into that zone felt like trespass. Not by law, by something older. The wrecks weren't just ships. There were shelters here, cracked domes with beds still inside. A child's toy, scorched at the edges, face melted into a scream. Supplies scattered but untouched. Not looted. Abandoned. Whatever had scared the evac teams off, it wasn't worth scavenging. That's what chilled me. Not the silence. The indifference. She'd made her home in this graveyard. Or was hiding someone in it. My thoughts turned back to the way she'd paused before leaving. The way her eyes had found mine. Not pleading. Not angry. Just waiting for what I'd do. I kept moving. Past a fallen comms tower half-eaten by vines. Stepped over a cracked screen showing nothing but static lines in frozen blue. The ground dipped, sloped into a low basin of buckled stone and leaning structures stitched together with scavenged plating. Someone had tried to seal it from the inside. My breath shortened, not from fear, from knowing I was close. Every instinct told me to turn around. I didn't. Not because I thought I was safe, but because I was too far in to pretend I didn't care. This wasn't a thief's trail. It was a child's retreat. And I was beginning to suspect she wasn't the only one down here. The shelter was hidden under what used to be a transit shell. Collapsed on one side, blackened by something hot and fast, half swallowed by the slope of the basin. From a distance, it looked like another broken machine left to rust. Up close, it breathed. The opening was small, just wide enough for someone her size to slip through. I waited. No movement. No sound. Just the faint scent of burned insulation and something beneath it. Heavier. Wet. Old. Familiar to anyone who's had to step over the wrong kind of body. I moved to the edge and crouched low. The hatch was cracked open with a rusted length of conduit wedged to hold it. Someone had forced it back after the collapse, cleared just enough space to crawl inside. Not scavenger work. Survivor work. Inside was heat, thick and clinging, the kind that soaks into your mouth and doesn't leave. I let my eyes adjust. She was there, kneeling, her back to me, shoulders hunched tight, arms wrapped around something on the ground. No reaction to my presence. She hadn't heard me, or maybe she had and didn't care. I stepped in. The light from outside pooled at my feet, but most of the pod was shadowed. Storage bins torn open. Medical kits picked clean. A water filter that hadn't worked in months, judging by the sludge ring inside the basin. Blankets pieced together from insulation foil. A cracked screen scrawled over in a language I couldn't read. She turned her head, just enough to see me. Didn't speak. Didn't move away. Just stayed there, one hand on the side of a figure lying motionless beneath the foil. It was the shape that stopped me. Not the child's. The other. Lying flat. Limbs long and thin, draped in what once might have been clothing. Eyes half open but unfocused. Breathing so shallow it looked like stillness. Skin stretched across bone like parchment. Lips dry and split. A line of dried red crusted from the corner of her mouth down to the collarbone. The girl placed something beside her. A crust of hard ration. Pressed it gently against cracked lips. No reaction. She tried again. Still nothing. That was when she looked up. Not at me. Through me. There was no fear in her face. No defense. Just a quiet readiness. As if she'd known this moment would come, had run out of reasons to fight it, and was simply waiting to see what kind of ending I would be. I took a step closer. The floor groaned. She didn't flinch. The pod smelled like the end of things. Rot from somewhere deeper in the walls. Mold crawling up the insulation. Stale breath of someone who hadn't spoken in too long. Sweat soaked into bedding that had never been clean. The kind of place where even light refused to linger. This wasn't a den. Not a hideout. Not even a home. It was a grave with the lid half closed. She placed the crust down beside the woman's head and pulled the foil higher. Covered her slowly, carefully, not with panic, with ritual. I stood there, unsure of what I'd followed her into. Not a trap, not a theft, just a child, giving what little she had to someone too far gone to ask for it. And me, standing there with a full canteen and no excuse left not to use it. I stepped closer. She didn't move. Not away, not toward. Just shifted her knees so her body stayed between mine and the figure on the ground. Not a threat, not a plea, just instinct. Placement. As if she'd done it before. I crouched. My boots scraped dust across the floor and she flinched slightly, but didn't back off. Her eyes stayed on me, wide but unblinking, waiting to see if I would earn the next breath of trust or take it away. The woman beneath the foil made a sound. Soft, thin, like wind catching a torn sail. Her chest moved. Barely. A rise. A drop. Her lips twitched and parted. And out came something I hadn't heard in years. A language they'd tried to wipe out. It wasn't words I could fully understand, just fragments. Old root phrases buried in a dialect the translators had stopped uploading when the treaties collapsed. But meaning has weight even when grammar fails. Her voice trembled with the shape of pain. Hunger. Maybe a name. I recognized one syllable. Not mine. Not hers. The girl's. The child leaned forward and placed her hand gently on her mother's cheek. Skin on skin. Warmth to failing warmth. Her mother's eyes opened, barely. Red-streaked. Clouded. They searched without focus. Landed on me. Didn't react. She said another word. Cracked halfway through. Might have been a question. The girl reached for something behind her. It was the bread. The same piece I'd dropped back at the shelter. She'd wrapped it in cloth. Protected it like treasure. It hadn't crumbled. Just hardened at the edges. She unwrapped it slowly. Broke it with careful pressure. Her hands moved as if any sudden shift might shatter more than food. Half for the woman. She pressed it to her lips. Nothing. She dipped her fingers into the crust. Rubbed a bit of it into the inside of the cheek. A swallow. The woman closed her mouth, barely. A sound escaped her. Not a word. Not relief. Just the air leaving her lungs like it had decided it didn't need to return. The girl took the other half and placed it on her own tongue. Chewed slowly. Not from manners. From exhaustion. I stayed crouched. I had food. I had water. More than they'd seen in days, maybe weeks. But I didn't offer it yet. Not because I was withholding. Because something told me it had to come in a sequence. There were rules in this space I didn't understand yet. Rituals born from desperation. You don't interrupt a prayer halfway through. She finished chewing and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Not ashamed. Just done. Her eyes returned to mine. Still not asking. Just watching. Measuring. The woman coughed. Not loud. Not wet. Dry. Almost like air catching in a gap between ribs. Her hand twitched once. I leaned in, placed my canteen on the floor between us, then backed up one step. Let her choose. The girl didn't reach for it immediately. She stared at it. The cap. The seal. The label. The weight of it. Like she thought it might vanish if she blinked. When she picked it up, she didn't drink. She opened it and poured a few drops into her palm. Tilted it carefully into her mother's mouth. Most of it missed. Some didn't. The woman breathed again. Slower. Her eyes never closed. Just stayed on the space above her. The girl took one small sip, wiped her mouth again, then looked at me with a gaze I'd seen only once before. In a mirror, the day I'd watched a comrade bleed out under a collapsed roof, knowing no one was coming to help. It's not begging. It's the face you wear when you already know what the answer is, but you ask anyway because some part of you refuses to stop pretending that maybe, just maybe, this time it'll be different. I stepped outside. Not far. Just enough to breathe air that hadn't passed through sickness and stale blankets. Dust rose in small curls around my boots, clung to the folds of my pants. settled in the cracks of my skin like it was trying to stay. The sky above wasn't any different than it had been an hour before. Gray. Hot. Utterly uninterested in anything crawling beneath it. I unstrapped the ration pouch from my belt. Counted without looking. 5 meals. 2 liters of water. Enough to reach the forward post if I moved fast and didn't stop. Maybe 3 days if I stretched it. For if I wanted to feel what they were feeling. I wasn't part of any unit. No backup. No beacon. No obligation. This wasn't a mission. It was a walk. A line I'd drawn to measure what kind of man I still was. I could walk away. She wasn't watching me from inside. She knew I hadn't left yet. But she didn't come to the hatch. No footsteps. No shuffling. No glance. That was what struck me hardest. She knew the choice wasn't hers. I'd seen beggars. Real ones. Desperate ones. The kind who clawed at boots, cried out, bartered names for half a crust. But not her. She sat beside her mother and let the moment pass without protest. That silence dug deeper than any scream. I stared at the open trail. The one I came through. It was still marked by my steps. I could follow them back. Leave the canteen. Toss a ration bar inside the pod as a mercy. Walk away before it became a memory. No one would question it. No one would know. That was the danger. There's a point out here where survival stops being instinct and starts becoming an excuse. You learn to lie in ration counts, to trim ethics down until they fit in your boot pocket. You do it once, it gets easier. Twice, you don't feel it. By the third, you're just a body walking toward warmth, stepping over bones without slowing down. I took a deep breath, but it didn't clear anything. My legs started to move. Not back toward the trail. Not yet. Just pacing. For steps left. 3 back. Hands resting on the pouch. Thumb pressing the seam of the last sealed meal until I felt the plastic bend. The wind picked up for a second. Not enough to cool. Just enough to remind me how thin the air felt when you were alone. I looked toward the shelter. Still no movement. It wasn't a test. She wasn't playing me. There was no game in those eyes. Just history. The kind that comes with watching too many people make the same choice and leave the same way. I hated how familiar that look had become. My hand went to the pouch again. I opened it. Took 1 bar out. Walked to the edge of the hatch and dropped it through. No ceremony. No words. I dropped a second. Waited. Still nothing. The third I held in my palm longer. My fingers didn't want to let go. I thought about the next few days. About my pace. About whether I could afford a detour if something happened. About the ration packs back at the base and the guards who pretended they didn't see you take extra if you came in wounded. I let it fall. That was enough to tip the balance. Once you give 3, 4 becomes simple. I crouched at the hatch and looked inside. Her back was still to me. Her shoulders low, hands folded in her lap. The woman hadn't moved. I reached for my canteen again. Topped the cup. Poured it into a cracked container I found by the wall. Left it within reach. Still she didn't speak. I didn't need her to. I stood up, slung the pouch across my shoulder. Lighter now by a margin I would feel later, and stepped back into the pod. I wasn't walking away. That meant something. I just didn't know what price it carried yet. I only knew I'd chosen to pay it. I cleared a space near the wall where the ceiling dipped low and the wind outside couldn't reach. The pod was too cramped to stand. So I worked on my knees, stacking shards of old plating into a crude basin and lining it with ashen wire. Took a spark from my igniter and fed it slivers of polymer scraped off an insulation roll. Caught fast. Burned sharp. Gave off a thin trail that clung to skin and didn't leave. She didn't come close. Just watched from where she sat, hands in her lap, shoulders touching the curve of her mother's side. Her eyes tracked everything. The way I moved, what I touched, where I placed each scrap of fuel. Not wary, not eager, just watching, as if trying to understand what kind of ritual I was building. I unwrapped a ration and emptied it into the pan. It wasn't much, just a brick of dried protein and salt, soaked in enough water to make it soft. I didn't add flavor. There wasn't any left. Heat rose in slow breaths from the bowl. The smell filled the pod like memory. Cheap food cooked over bad fire. The kind that reminds you you're still alive but not sure why. When it finished, I let it cool a little, then split it into 3. One piece I set in front of her. She didn't reach for it. The second I placed beside the woman's mouth. A faint twitch told me she still had reflex. Not enough to chew. Maybe just enough to taste. The third I ate. Slowly. Bite by bite. She watched every motion but not with hunger. More like she was trying to memorize the rhythm of it. The timing. The way a human feeds when he doesn't know what comes next. She picked up her share after the first few minutes. Broke it in half without looking. Ate one piece. Tucked the other into a cloth bundle and placed it beside the wall. I nodded. That gesture meant more than any thank you. I finished my food, rinsed my hands with a splash from the canteen, and leaned back against the curved shell. The fire dimmed. Shadows returned. The woman's breathing slowed again, each inhale fighting through bone and tight skin. I looked over at the child. She was still sitting cross-legged, but her hands had moved. She was holding something, thin, folded. She unwrapped it and slid it toward me. A drawing. Crude. Smudged in the corners. The kind of ink made from burned cloth and damp plastic. Scratched into the back of a meal pouch. 3 figures. All holding hands. One tall. One small. One lying down between them. No labels. No names. Just lines. Jagged and shaky. Drawn by someone whose fingers hadn't known peace in weeks. I didn't speak. She waited. I nodded again. She looked away, folded the drawing back into the cloth, placed it carefully behind her. Not for display. For keeping. Something sharp twisted under my ribs. Not guilt. I'd felt that before. This was something else. Like being handed a role you didn't ask for in a play you didn't know you were in, and realizing the script had already been written. She didn't expect me to stay, but she'd already made room for me in the story. The drone came at dusk. No hum. No signal tone. Just a glint through the cracks in the pod wall. A thin red beam scanning across the floor and slicing through the last warmth of the fire. I covered the girl's eyes with my hand before she could move. Her body stiffened. Not from surprise. From recognition. She'd seen that light before. I stepped outside, slow and upright, arms visible. The drone hovered high just inside range. His lens adjusted, zoomed, paused. Took in my face. The shelter. The open ration tin. The shape of 2 bodies inside. Turned and shot skyward, disappearing into the haze. We had a day. Maybe less. I packed what I could. Split the remaining food into smaller bundles. Hid the extra water under shattered panels. Covered the girl and her mother with thermal wraps cut into strips. Made the pod look empty. No movement. No life. Didn't matter. They came on the 3rd morning. 3 men in reinforced gear, not local. No colors. No insignia. Just dust-worn armor and fresh rounds clipped to the shoulder. One of them carried a scanner. Another had a containment pack strapped to his back. The third held his weapon loose, finger close to the trigger. None of them spoke when they stepped into the basin. I stood where they could see me. No sudden movements. No raised hands. Just a body between them and what lay inside. The one with the scanner approached first. Held it low like a leash. The screen blinked green, then red, then green again. He frowned. Turned to the man with the weapon and shook his head once. The one with the pack moved past him. I stepped in his way. He stopped. Raised one eyebrow. Didn't speak. I said nothing. Just stayed planted. He looked over my shoulder. Scanned the pod entrance. Tilted his head, calculating something I didn't like. The man with the weapon took a step forward. He spoke. Contamination risk. Off-record life forms. Restricted zone protocol. Immediate removal. No exception. His voice had the smoothness of someone who'd said it before. I told him there was no threat here. No movement beyond the pod. No infection. No bodies worth reporting. He looked past me again. I moved to block his view. He raised the muzzle halfway. The girl inside made a sound. Small. A breath caught wrong. Not even a word. Just enough to draw the weapon fully upright. He aimed. I stepped in front of the shot and said his name. Not the one he gave me. The one on his badge. From his old unit. From before he burned off the registry marks and switched assignments to avoid tribunal review. His expression changed, just slightly. I told him I'd seen the debriefs. Knew the codes. Knew the treaties still bound us, even in forgotten places. That targeting non-combatants in zones under suspended clearance was still a court-martial offense. That I had the recording. That the drone's sweep log timestamps, locations, biosigns, identifiers. He didn't lower the weapon. I said it again. This time louder. He dropped it 1 inch. I said one more thing. He lowered it completely. The one with the scanner muttered something under his breath and walked back to the ridge. The third followed. No orders given. No retreat called. They left without another word. No threats. No warnings. Just boots and dust, growing fainter with every step. When they were gone, I went back inside. The girl hadn't moved. She didn't ask what happened. She already knew. The storm arrived without warning. No flash. No thunder. Just the sound of the earth being peeled open grain by grain. Dust hit the pod like shrapnel. The walls groaned, pressure shifting. Perfect cover. I wrapped the mother in insulation cloth, reinforced the seams with wiring from the wreckage, bundled her weight across a stretch frame made from shattered crate sides and broken panel rods. The girl carried nothing. Her arms were full of something I couldn't see. We left through the drainage path beneath the basin. The access point had caved long ago, but the runoff shaft still took weight. I broke the seal with my boots, pried the hatch free, and lowered us into the dark. It smelled like metal and algae and the kind of rot that comes from silence. Water moved somewhere in the walls. The tunnel bent often. Sometimes it dropped, sometimes it narrowed so tight I had to turn sideways and drag the makeshift stretcher behind me inch by inch. The girl didn't complain. We moved like we'd rehearsed it. She held a light scavenged from my pack. I kept one hand on the grip bar and the other ready for whatever didn't want us passing through. The storm above masked all sound. No chance of drones picking us up. No trackers in these lines. Just old wiring and the ghosts of an evacuation too rushed to finish. We surfaced near what used to be a recon station. A dome half collapsed, satellite dish sheared clean off, solar arrays bent and useless. But the walls still stood. The structure took weight. That was enough. Inside, I found a broken medbay, powered by a cracked auxiliary panel still clinging to life. I rerouted what current I could, bypassed the failsafe, and dumped the last of my solar charge into the core. Lights came on, flickered, stayed. I set her down in the far corner, patted the floor with what was left of the rescue blankets. The girl laid beside her, one arm across the chest that barely rose. Her hand moved with each breath like she was measuring time with her own skin. I scavenged the drawers, found syringes still sealed, antibiotics past expiration but viable, painkillers strong enough to quiet most endings, hydration tabs, broken in half, packet of field gel, one dose of something labeled only in code. I used it all, not at once, across days, each hour a battle against something I couldn't name. Not infection, not fever, just the slow unraveling of someone who'd carried too much for too long and finally reached the end of the rope. I fed her broth made from boiled ration scrap and salt water. The girl spooned it in with hands that never shook. Each night I watched for the moment the breathing would stop. Each morning it didn't. Until it did. I didn't hear a cry. I woke to pressure on my arm. Small. Still. Her fingers wrapped around my wrist. Her eyes locked on mine. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. I sat up and looked past her. The body hadn't moved. Her chest no longer rose. No tremor in the throat. No sound from the mouth. Just a kind of stillness that doesn't belong to sleep. The girl didn't release her grip. She wasn't asking what to do. She was making sure I didn't leave. And I didn't. The ground outside the station was dry enough to crack beneath a boot and hard enough to make digging feel like penance. I didn't use tools. I used my hands. The girl stood beside me, her shadow long against the broken slope. She held nothing, said nothing, just watched as I pulled stone after stone from the top layer until the red beneath gave way to something loose enough to shape. Each scoop cut skin from my knuckles. I let it. Pain felt honest. We didn't wrap the body. We lowered her gently, limbs folded like sleep. Her hands still held the edge of the cloth the girl had placed days before. A small thread had come undone at the seam. It moved once in the wind, then stopped. I filled the grave without counting the motions. Every rock back in place, but none where it had started. The surface rose slightly, marked by what we carried and couldn't say. Nearby, a patch of bloom had taken root between cracks in the old rail line. Pale blue petals, thin as wire. Shouldn't have survived. Somehow did. I plucked 3. Placed them in a triangle above the mound. Not a gesture. Just truth. The girl reached into her pack and pulled out the crust she'd saved. Still wrapped. Still whole. She placed it gently at the center of the stones. Didn't look away when she did it. Didn't kneel. Just pressed it down with one hand and stepped back. No tears. No words. She'd already given what grief she had. I took out my blade. Found a shard of paneling from the station wall. Wiped it clean. Scratched the words in slow lines, each stroke biting into metal like it wanted to resist. First in my language. Block letters. Clear. Then in hers. Fewer symbols. Tighter curve. Harder to copy. Easier to feel. I drove the marker into the dirt beside the grave. She gave what she had. The wind carried dust between us. She didn't move to brush it away. We stood there until the sun dropped low enough to erase our shadows. No prayers. No promise. Just silence. And something in it that weighed more than anything I could say. I didn't report back. Didn't trigger the beacon. Didn't log the detour. Left the badge and the unit tag on the medbay shelf beside a shattered screen that hadn't shown a signal in years. They'll say I went off-path. Maybe lost. Maybe dead. It won't matter. I've stopped belonging to anything that keeps score. We left the station just before the next heat surge. Packed what little remained, water rations, a shard knife, 2 blankets stripped into straps. Carried the load. She carried herself. Never asked where we were going. I didn't lie about having a plan. We walked the edge of the wastes, where nothing grows and nothing hunts, where the wind shifts direction without reason and the ground changes shape if you stare too long. Some call it dead land. It never felt that way to me. It's not dead. It just doesn't care who you were before you stepped into it. She kept pace without complaint. Didn't ask for rest. Didn't speak unless she needed to. We shared food we didn't have. Measured sips between steps. Broke crust into corners. Counted bites like currency. She slept beside me under rusted hulls. Inside broken doors. Beneath sky that never promised rain. She never moved in her sleep. Like her body still didn't trust the ground to hold her if she let go. One night she reached out. Not to hold. Just to know I was still there. Her fingers brushed mine. Light as breath. I didn't move away. We passed signs of old stations. Blackened posts. Half-torn banners. Bones stripped clean and buried by time. Nothing to stop for. Nothing to remember. We walked through them like ghosts. Not haunting. Just passing. I stopped counting days after the first week. Time doesn't track the same when no one's waiting on the other end. She learned a few more words. I learned a few of hers. Not enough to speak in sentences, just enough to be understood. She pointed at a ridge once. Asked if it had a name. I said not anymore. That seemed to satisfy her. She never asked to leave. Never asked to stay. Just woke up each morning when I did. Stepped into the dust. And moved forward. That was enough. I started to forget the sound of machinery, the tone of alarms, the cadence of orders shouted over broken comms. They didn't fit here. What stayed were smaller things. The scrape of stone under bare feet. The way her breath hitched just once each time she looked back at nothing. The quiet. I don't know where we're headed. There's a place someone mentioned once, beyond the salt flats, where the old ships went down and some still shine in the sun. Maybe it's there. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. We're not looking for safe. We're not looking to be found. We're just moving forward. Side by side. No ranks. No papers. No past. Just two bodies in a world that no longer remembers what it meant to be owned. She doesn't belong to me. I don't belong to anything. We choose to walk. That's all.